For this week's podcast, I just want to chat with you a little bit about some of my thoughts, feelings, um, conclusions, and connections over the past several weeks, maybe the last couple of months, maybe over the last 10 years. I don't know. Uh, I've had a lot of bizarre conversations here recently, and I find myself constantly having to confront hypocrisy among people who claim to be Christian. There's a lot of hypocrisy that I encounter, and I assume you encounter as well. Or maybe you don't recognize the hypocrisy that abounds. There's a lot of irony as well. And between irony and hypocrisy, I don't know if I'd say there's a lot of work to do, or there's a lot to fight, or there's a lot to come up against. I don't really know what the proper terminology is for that. So I'm just going to talk with you about some of the hypocrisy that I continue to encounter and how very, very tired I am of it. One of the things I find is I sometimes encounter people that are older, about my age, or maybe a little older, who talk about uh, the problems they found with their parents and grandparents in how they were very legalistic. They were all about the rules of the church. They weren't allowed to do this. They weren't allowed to do this. Um, a woman who cut her hair or showed her elbows, or a man who didn't wear a jacket. There were a lot of things that there was just the rules were so important, and the legalism on what you had to do to prove that you were a Christian, or they just excommunicate you from the church, which is absolutely not Christian. Might be biblical, but not Christian. Remember, when you talk about things being biblical, you have to remember that Jesus had to come to clarify, because the people were all about rules, and they weren't all about being real and about being loving and kind and showing the love of God, or trying to actually restrict the love of God, or doing bad things and blaming it on God. Said, well, God told me to do this. Well, no, God didn't. I continue to have problems with people who claim to be a Christian, but yet they take their convictions and continue to shove those in the faces of other people. People that say, well, if you're a Christian, there's only one way to do it, and it has to follow these rules that I believe. And if you don't do this, then you couldn't possibly be a Christian, because this is the only way. The only way is to do it the way I think it should be. And that's very limiting. People continue to try to put God in this box. They built this box that defines God, and God's not in that box. I have a box right here I use to keep my microphones and things in. But no matter how we define God, even those of us that have a very open and accepting outlook on life and on others, I think I am a pretty open-minded person, even within my spirituality and my Christianity. But I have beliefs about God, and even my beliefs about God are limiting. And no matter how I have defined or limited God, well, then God's here in this box of how I have limited and defined God. And that's just not the way it is. So no matter who you are, no matter what church you belong to, or no matter what organization or sect of religion with which you belong, if you have some beliefs and thoughts and ideas about God or the concept of God, those define God and place God in a box. And no matter who we are, no matter how I define God, no matter how you define God, one thing is for sure: God is not in the box that you have placed God in. That's just not God. And as humans with our finite minds give these barriers. And no matter what they are, God is much bigger than whatever box we have placed God into. And I think that that's very important. Part of the problem with the politico-social structures that are tearing apart our country at this moment in the name of Christianity, or they're abusing and misusing the concept of Christ and Christianity and God in order to manipulate people to get what they want. And what they want is power and money. And they've been able to fool a lot of people in order to do that. But you can't treat people one way and say that you're following a God of love. It just doesn't work. A lot of the things that the leaders of our government are doing is so far from what is right and correct and honorable and true and kind, and very far from anything Christian. Now, if you don't claim to be a Christian and don't care anything about that, okay, then think about what is right and honorable. But many of the people, whether they actually are Christian or claim to be Christian, when it comes to politics, yeah, everybody wants to say they're a Christian. And there's just so much that's going on that's just absolutely counterintuitive to what the life and lessons of Jesus are, as Jesus came to clarify that which God calls us to do. And it was not all of the rules of Moses in this first half, but it was all about this little section where Jesus came and clarified. And you know what? This is going to be hard for some people to understand, but it's not even about all of these letters that are attributed to Paul. Okay, so if you're looking at this Bible, Moses' laws, Paul's commentary, the words of Jesus, this is where it is. Okay? I mean, if you're looking at Christianity, it's right there in the name, Christ, the words of Jesus. I'm not saying that nothing else in there matters or nothing else in there has any value, but you can't use those other parts for your primary religious beliefs. That's just not the way it is. You know, I could pick apart communion. It's kind of like, why do we do communion in many churches today the way we do? Because of what the Apostle Paul said it was. Well, did we forget when Jesus had the Last Supper with his disciples and what Jesus said it was? That's not really part of communion, how it's administered and used in probably nearly all denominations. So it's very easy for us to be sidetracked on the wrong thing. And this whole thing about complaining about our ancestors and their legalism and rules, and really basically it's like it's okay for the women of the church to dye their hair blonde, and you know there are more blonde women in churches than are biologically blonde, but we don't have a problem with that. Or for women to get breast augmentation and have great big old boobs. Nobody has a problem with that, because the people that make the rules and write most of the church rules most of them are heterosexual males who probably like big breasts. So we're not going to make that a wrong. And dressing up and wearing makeup and jewelry, all those gender affirming things that women do to make them even more hyper feminine, that doesn't seem to be a problem. It doesn't matter that old church rules were against all of those things, but the churches have evolved. I've been in church and women wearing dresses or shorts so short that if they lean forward to pick something up, I practically feel like I've been mooned right there in church. And it's like, well, do we have a problem with that? Well, some people claim to have a problem with that, but we have changed and evolved with the rules of what we wear, and rules about makeup and jewelry and cutting of the hair, not cutting of the hair, wearing hats in church, not wearing hats in church, the way we do communion, when we do communion, how often. Who do we allow to take communion in church? Oh, you can't take communion because you're not qualified. You haven't followed all of these steps. You haven't come down to the altar and prayed and asked for forgiveness and cried at least 7 to 12 minutes. You haven't needed at least 3 tissues, or you haven't shaken the preacher's hand, or you haven't come back Sunday night to be baptized. And if you weren't baptized in a church that we recognize, well, you can't even be a member here. All of those rules are man-made rules, and they're not valid. Um, I understand having rules for organizations, but when they're counterintuitive to the ministry of Jesus, and if your church truly claims to be a Christian church, the word Christ is in Christian, then why are we off target? Why are we off target so much? Are we having church because we're trying to get more people? Or are we having church because we're trying to love people and help the hurting and actually make a difference in the actual lives of people? God has called us on this planet to love others and be in community with each other. God has not called us to this planet to make an all-exclusive club of people who are following my rules. If they're not following my rules, then they's bad people. We better keep our kids away from them bad people, because they're not following my rules, or they're saying stuff that don't match my rules. They're trying to confuse us. We're just simply trying to love people as Jesus modeled, and that's what we're to do. This past few weeks, I continue to be passive aggressively evangelized by people who still call me out in lies, telling me that I'm doing wrong this way, this way, this way, this way. I'm not a Christian. I'm teaching and preaching things that are not true. I'm teaching things that are the truth. In fact, I'm calling out the people that are attacking me, which is why they have stepped up their attacks on me and their convictions and their rules for how things have to be, and they're shoving those in my face, to the place that in my last podcast I even stated that it's time for them to sit down and shut up, and I'm going to tell them that. Sit down and shut up. They think they are so convinced that they know what God wants that they're being unkind to others. Basically, they're being jerks, and they're working for Jesus. They're not. They're basically jerks for Jesus, but they're not for Jesus because they are not acting as Jesus calls them to. But they're being jerks for Jesus. In fact, I was thinking about this week, and I dug this off of my shelf. This book that I had from a few years ago. We use this in a book study on my Wednesday night group. Well, we did this in the fall of 2021. That's when I bought it. Let's see when this book came out. Oh, it was brand new then. It came out in 2021. It's called John Pavlovich wrote this book. If God is love, don't be a jerk. Finding a faith that makes us better humans. If God is love, then don't be a jerk. Great book, by the way. The things I'm talking about now might dovetail with this. I mean, but I'm not talking directly from that book right now. I'm talking about my experiences. These people running around, they're really being jerks for Jesus. That shouldn't be a thing, but it is. Probably if you're listening to this podcast, you know some people that are jerks for Jesus. And interestingly enough, the people that I'm encountering that are the biggest jerks right now for Jesus in my life are talking about their ancestors who were so legalistic that they were basically jerks for Jesus, and they're so happy that they're not like their parents and grandparents. Well, they are, and in many ways they're worse because they're calling out people for being jerks while they're being jerks to a whole new group of people for different reasons. No, they're not going up to church and telling the ladies with the fashionable hairstyles and the bleach blonde hair and telling them that they're sinning and going to hell and they need to stop all that and live for God. It's like, yeah, God loves everybody just as they are, but you can't stay that way. So we're telling all these people with the bleach blonde hair, so, well, God will love you, but you got to stop doing that. Stop using that peroxide. You can't be having that fake blonde hair. That's not the way God made you. You are not biologically blonde. You got to stop that. No, we don't do that. You know, many churches claim to be against divorce, but if you had a gay married couple show up to your church and get saved, if that's the terminology you use for your path, or choose to follow the life and lessons of Jesus, that's the way I wish to express that. Means the same thing the way I define it. Some people try to say that those are two different definitions, but they don't have to be. They can be the same. But I could say, okay, so these people come to your church, they get saved, they get baptized. What is the church then going to do? Say, well, if you're going to be a Christian, y'all have to get divorced because two men can't be married together, or two women can't be married together, or a man can't be married to a woman who's actually a trans woman. And then what do you say to her? I said, oh, you've gone through the surgeries, you have uh, breasts. Well, so do some of the straight women in your church. You're going to make them take out all of their artificial breasts, and then what do you do? Um, if they're post surgery, um, a trans woman who's post op had top surgery and bottom surgery, uh, put 5 naked women in the room, and one of them's a trans woman post op, you would not be able to tell which was which. So what do you do then? Anatomically, they appear completely female. So what does the church do with that? Do you tell them that, okay, you've got to go and now um, go through reconstructive surgery and Somehow you have to find you a penis and sew it back on, and testicles, and get rid of those breasts, and stop taking female hormones. And since you don't have testicles, your body's not making male hormones, so you need to start. Is that really what the church wants? No, because once the church has already eliminated you, there's no way the church would accept them. And there's no way the church should be telling a gay couple that, well, if you're going to come to church here, you'll have to get a divorce because you can't be married anymore. Because it really is about appearance. I mean, it's not really about sex. If it was, then every church would have like the sex investigators who would go out to every couple in the church and set up cameras and watch to make sure that all of their sexual activities are exactly what their church says are acceptable practices. And if you and a lot of times they use the Old Testament laws of Moses for that, and that's because they believe all of life was contained in the male ejaculate. So if the male ejaculate went anywhere other than into a vaginal cavity, then that would be like aborting a life, because they believed all of the baby was there. It was like the women were not understood to be important in the creation of life. They were just a place for the seed to be planted, like dirt. You know, you plant seeds in the dirt and it grows. So a man ejaculates into a vaginal cavity, and that's where the seed gets planted, like dirt, and then it grows. They didn't understand anything more than that. So if any male ejaculate went anywhere other than that, that was like killing a life. Can you think of any sexual practices that heterosexual couples participate in where the male ejaculate ends up somewhere other than 100% of it in the vaginal cavity? Hmm. Hmm. Then maybe the church needs to be going after that. I mean, or they're being hypocritical. I mean, you know, is it all or nothing? Okay, now I'm being a little extreme and ridiculous, but you have to take this conversation to the extreme and the ridiculous, or it becomes hypocritical. So the real conversation is, when we are called to love all people, we are not called to say that we speak for God when we don't. No matter how much you believe what you believe is true. I mean, I do. I know what I believe, and I know that I believe what I believe is true. But I absolutely cannot go to you and start eliminating some of you based on my beliefs, because that's not what I'm called to do. I'm called to love the Lord God with all my heart, my soul, my strength, my mind, my talents, my time, all that I have. And the proof that I do that is I love all of my neighbors as myself. And implied in that is I'm supposed to love myself. And I will tell you, as a man in his 60s, I still have difficulty loving myself, because the religious community and the church's false theology has taught me to hate myself. So I have to continually work to love myself, so then I can follow my teachings to love my neighbors as myself. Implied I have to love myself. So I have to keep working on loving myself. And I tell you what, all this group of people that are jerks for Jesus continue to make it hard for me sometimes to love myself. It's kind of interesting. For me, where am I going to go where there are people that love me? Really love me. Not people that say, I love you, but let me tell you something in love. Let me tell you something in love. These jerks for Jesus. Come here. I'm going to whack you with this. Here's what Moses said. Moses isn't God, but I'm going to take what Moses said and I'm going to cut you. I'm going to stab you. I'm going to make you bleed. And at the same time, ignoring other things that Moses said, says, oh, no, that's not for us today. But there's other stuff. This is for us today. And who decided that? I did. I did. As part of the Jerks for Jesus, I decided that. And I'm going to tell you. And then continue to tell lies about me. There are whole church denominations that have so many lies in their theology. My mother goes to a church, and when she first started going to that church, the preacher said, if you have a gay child, then you did something wrong. And my mother's friend was sitting next to her and told us, you better go have a talk with him. Did she? No. I still don't understand how she could go to a church where the preacher would say that, but I personally don't know that I could ever step inside the doors of a church of that denomination when that's the theology, the written theology. There's just so much ignorance and refusal to learn and understand, and a refusal to carry out the call of Jesus to love all of our neighbors as ourselves and stop making it difficult for me to love myself. God loves me. God calls me to love others. And yes, I really do believe in Genesis where it said it's not good for us to be alone. But let me tell you, I spend a lot of my time alone. And I have even some people that kind of want to accept me as a Christian, but it's only if I stay alone. Because they say God may love you, but you have to be alone. That's just your lot in life. Poor baby. That's being jerks. That's being a jerk. People that continually passive aggressively tell you stuff or even lie about you. I even had someone lie about me to my face this week, and I just stopped and looked at him and said, that's absolutely not true, and you know that's not true, so why are you saying that? And they didn't back down. They doubled down on what they said, and there's absolutely no evidence because it was a false statement, and they knew it was false. And I'm thinking, like, how could you say that? How could you say that? And maybe it was just complete confusion. I don't know. It's like they know some facts about you, so they're going to take those facts and, oh, because of those facts, you're a bad person. So all of these other things about you must be bad too. And even where say stuff that it's like, that's not true. You have no evidence of that. You've never seen that. You've never heard that. You've never witnessed that. And no one has ever told you that about me. So why would you say that? And why do you act like that's a truth when I come back at you and said, that's absolutely not true? Because it goes back to my last podcast. It is time for these people that are jerks for Jesus to sit down and shut up. It's time to flip those tables. And that's really where I am. And I tell you what, I really struggled with this, talking about these jerks for Jesus. So I'd like to use a stronger word than jerk. But curse words are not part of my vocabulary. They're just not. They're just not things that come out of me. But when I talk about jerks for Jesus, I really wanted to call them something else for Jesus, because that's really what they are. But we'll leave it at jerks for Jesus. The alliteration kind of works, so we'll just leave it as that. But these people that constantly shove their convictions in your face and tell you that God's grace doesn't cover you unless you follow these steps, that's exactly what Jesus came to deliver us from. When you talk about the legalism of your ancestors, you're applying that in a different way now, but only worse, because you're hypocritical, because you're calling out the legalism of someone else while you're doing it in a new way to different people, to the generations under you. So that's worse. If your membership in the Jerks for Jesus is pending, or if you are in that group, it's time for you to get out of that group. It's time for you to be Christ-like Christians for Jesus. It's time for you to love all people for Jesus. It's time for you to not shove your convictions in someone else's face. And for heaven's sake, don't do it repeatedly, because what are you going to do? You're going to turn people away till they don't want to be around you. You will turn these people out of your church. There will be hundreds and thousands and millions of people, there already are, that will not step foot in a church because of the Jerks for Jesus, because of the hypocrisy. If they can't find it with the so-called Christians, where are they going to find it? I think many of today's churches, their hypocrisies are actually creating the vacuum that creates a space for agnostics and atheists. Because if they continue to claim to be followers of the life and lessons of Jesus, and they're doing the exact opposite of that, that hypocrisy makes us say, I don't want any part of those people. And there are groups of churches that I don't want any part of. I'm going to have fun editing this because I didn't make any notes. I just came and talked to you. I've been thinking about these Jerks for Jesus. It made me think of this book. I recommend it. Get it and read it. I pulled it off my bookshelf a few years ago. My Wednesday night book study used that as a study. I kind of love that book. I follow John Pavlovitz on Facebook and other places. I do like his book, and I do like his posts. He uses words that I would not use, but I'm not him. I'm not going to go and tell him that he can't be a Christian and use those words, because that would be false, and I would be the actual jerk that I'm trying to tell to sit down, shut up, and stop that. So I absolutely won't do that. That's not my call to tell him not to use those words. And I won't be that kind of hypocrite and do that. But this was my podcast for this week. This was not one of my scheduled topics for this year, but this came from Life with Larry in the last few weeks. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. It really helps me out a lot with the likes and the subscribers, especially if you're someone who's watched several of these. It's free to do that, and it helps me out with the algorithms within the YouTube channel, the way things work. So thank you for watching. Have a good week.